Good evening, everyone. Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Donna Gordon, and I'm part of the membership team here at IISM. Your speaker today is Lee Marsh, but before I hand over to Lee, I'm just going to run through a few things first. To begin with, you should see to the right of your screen a toolbar with various options. You will be on mute for the duration of the webinar. Feel free to ask any questions, make any comments using the question area, and we will take 5 to 10 minutes at the end to respond to these. If you need any support using GoToWebinar, the I symbol will take you to the support site. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be placed on the IISM YouTube channel after the event. So that's enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Lee. Take it away, Lee.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Donna. So hopefully you can all now see a screen with the PowerPoint slide on. And hopefully not the presenter view. Because otherwise that might be a bit small. Okay, so first of all, welcome to the Northwest Region IISM webinar for this evening. Just a couple of things that I want to kind of just highlight. So first of all, we have a number of people who have joined our committee, so welcome to any of those that are on this evening. But we still are urgently in need of a communications volunteer. So for things like posting onto LinkedIn, and perhaps kind of posting some stuff in advance of webinars like this evening. So if you really do fancy helping us out, even if it's just for a short period of time until we can find a more permanent person, then please do consider it. You can email your details to the networks at iirsm.org. Some information that they will need are things like your membership number, which part of the region you're based in, and obviously the communications role will be the one that you're interested in. And perhaps a couple of little paragraphs about yourself and what you might be able to help us with, either on the committee or as a communications volunteer. So please do consider that. It would be a great help to the region and to the branch. So tonight we're looking at getting proactive with risk and safety improvement programs. Unfortunately, the person who I was going to collaborate with this evening for this topic is unable to join us due to other things that have happened. So I'm going to use some generic kind of case examples in that way. But just to let you know, we've still got a series of these webinars to take place. So then in September, it might slightly change depending upon a guest speaker on emergency planning that we might be able to get. But if we can't get them, then we'll be looking at kind of the working together aspect, engaging and working with safety representatives and stakeholders. So that'll be September. And I think the date that we're going to be looking at is the 22nd, but that'll come out a bit later on. And then in October, we have a session looking at things like drugs and alcohol in the workplace and influences of that in the festivity seasons. So I'll lead that one with some core information around issues and knock-on effects that can happen for businesses and individuals. And then we'll finish the year off in November. So we won't be having one of these webinars in December. But in November, we'll be looking at kind of assessing and improving competency. So we'll be looking at a range of ways, and some of you will have seen in things like the Sentinel recently, some stuff from organisations where they've clearly got their agenda on things like regulated qualifications. But actually, there's lots of different ways of assessing and improving competency, and it's not just a one-dimensional hobby horse. So we'll be looking at that kind of process there in November as well. So tonight, as I said, we're looking at getting proactive with safety and risk improvement programs. And my aim really for us to look at is understanding reactive and proactive measures, because there is obviously a balance between those two. The evolution of proactive measures, so a little bit of kind of history and background for those of you that don't know, and also about kind of some experiences of bespoke improvement planning. If you do have any questions as we go, then please put them into the chat column, and at various stages or at the end, Donna will be able to communicate to me your questions, and then we can go back and perhaps answer some of those questions as well. So let's start off with a kind of a particular interesting title, the impact. So that's the wrong title up there, so just ignore up at the top. That's what you get when you're quickly altering slides. But it's the Guide to Measuring Health and Safety Performance. That's what it should say up at the top there. And when it comes to kind of measuring health, sorry, I've gone slightly off topic with that, not having made that change. So when it comes to improvement programs, there are a number of historical kind of elements to this. So within the UK, we've traditionally used, so let me just go back to that screen. Traditionally, we've used this HSG 65 in the UK, and even though it's kind of been, I suppose, gazumped, it's still probably one of the better, kind of processes, thinking about a guide to measuring health and safety performance, and also thinking about improvement programs. But there are many others. So one there, we have things like ISO 45001, which is obviously the occupational safety and health management system. Again, it has some really good stuff around compliance, and it's got some great philosophies and processes about getting people to think about improvement along that way. And then we've got some other standards, one that, and a couple of them around risk management, but this one, 22301, which is all about kind of the security and resilience, business continuity, kind of programs and systems and stuff like that. But there are many measuring programs, and HSG 65, 45001, 22301, as well as more specific ones, which sometimes are more regional or industrialized for different sectors. So RCMS is one that, from my days in ICI, they used RCMS, which started as kind of more of an environmental management system in the US, but kind of went in from environmental into occupational safety and health, and was predominantly used quite a lot within the chemical sectors, and still is to this day. So all of these things have got one thing in common. They come into this particular Plan, Do, Check, Act. So and there's lots of different diagrams out there, and all sorts of weird and wonderful expressions that people have come up with over the years. But they've all got this in common, regardless of whether or not it's HSG 65, whether or not it's 45001, whether or not it's some particular industry standard. They've all got this particular Plan, Do, Check, Act in there. A lot of people kind of put it back down to a scientific approach. Francis Bacon, even Galileo had processes, and there's scripts to show that actually they went through this process of plan, doing, checking the instrumentation, checking the findings, and then feeding those outcomes, the act, back into the Plan, Do, Check, Act in a rough kind of way. So it's been around a long time, this particular process, and for many people, when it probably came out, in this particular format, in probably the 50s, with Edward Deming, who was an American engineer, and I think he became a senator. But he was the guy who they sent into Japan after World War II. And a lot of people talk about quality assurance being a Japanese philosophy, but it's more of a combination of Edward Deming's philosophy of improvement, as well as kind of some other Japanese philosophies as well. So, but he really, kind of added a lot of detail to this particular philosophy of plan, do, check, act, and ultimately it's at the core of every single improvement program, regardless of what people tell you. It is at the core of every single one of them. It's rooted in things like product development and product quality, but absolutely works for risk and safety across the board in that way. What I will say is, from my own research into quality improvement programs and reading quite a lot about Deming's early work as an engineer, what I will say is his philosophy really did fall on very fertile kind of ground when he went to Japan. They absolutely just embraced that philosophy. They needed to rebuild a country that had been decimated not only by the war, but actually the previous influenza pandemic of the early 1900s. So they had to really embrace, better quality, kind of improvements, better lean processes, and that's ultimately where this all, kind of evolved from in the 1950s. So that's basically what I would say is the, kind of the really important, kind of parts of this particular, philosophy really, is it is going back to creating a continual improvement process where we actually standardize, we then plan, do, check, act, and we're building improvement opportunities, and we keep driving those improvement options and aims until ultimately we get a new standard, a new improved level of standard, and then we do the same process and we keep standardizing those improvements, and we keep looking for that ever elusive golden egg of improvement going forward. So lots of organizations achieve this in a number of different ways. So how do you get buy-in from senior team or from employees? Well, there are definitely different buy-in approaches and buy-in levels. From an organizational perspective, if people sign up to ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, your ISO 9000, 14001, 45001, 22000, then you're setting a level of compliance and a philosophy that actually these standards, if they're applied correctly, should lead to improvements. So that's one of the big things. I know from companies where I've been a health and safety manager or a director of safety and risk, one of the big things that almost all of those organizations do is they use any achievement of ISO standards as a sales pitch for being able to market that company or to market a product or a service based on those ISO. So for many organizations, especially in my sector, which is predominantly chemical manufacturing sector, ISO recognition and application is king in relation to being able to market more effectively and actually get product to market. So a couple of other resources. Not only are there ISO standards, as I mentioned before, there's things like RCMS, so Responsible Care Management Systems. This is one that I became exceptionally familiar with when I worked for ICI in the from 2001 up until around about kind of 2009, and I became an auditor for this. Went to the States. And as I say, it started generally from an environmental management responsible care for the chemical sectors, but ultimately became more holistic than that, including in its later kind of cases or more recent business continuity. So responsible care management systems uses very, very similar philosophy. They're about creating a baseline of standard of competency and application. And then the philosophy on the back of that is once you've achieved that particular standard, how do you plan, do, check, act for improvement? How are you, chasing that elusive golden egg to keep improving safety and risk? And then there are a number of other things that kind of go. So RCMS is a bit like ISO. It's an international framework. Lots of companies all over the world, lots of chemical companies use it all over the world, sometimes in addition to ISO. But then we've got more generalistic resources of being proactive, of chasing this kind of continual improvement program. One of them, very, very common, is Six Sigma. And what I will say, Six Sigma is not for the faint-hearted, so at all. Having trained initially as a brown belt in Six Sigma when I was in ICI in 2004, I then went on when I became the risk and continuity manager to become a black belt, managing a number of projects in the UK, Europe, and in Africa. Some of them outside of my normal working, kind of knowledge base, but applying the aspects of Six Sigma. And for many people, they'll often say, to do Six Sigma well, it should technically be, outside of some of your normal knowledge base, because that's where you ask the more pertinent questions and stuff like that. It's a very, very good system, and without any question, it's a tough program for anybody who's ever done the green belt, brown belt, black belt, kind of stuff around Six Sigma. You have to provide all sorts of assignments and project overviews, and actually have your project reviewed by assessors and peer reviews and all sorts of various bits. And when it's done right, it's done very, very well. And people who are trained in Six Sigma often, when it comes to continual improvement, actually do very, very well. However, my experience in the UK and internationally, so when I left ICI, I worked in oil and gas for 5 years. And what I will say is it becomes a bit of a fad. So, a change of management team happens, chief operating officer changes, chief finance officer changes, and they've been doing perhaps a different particular process like Kaizen or something like that, and all of a sudden that simply becomes the new fad, because it's led by the people that are making the decision rather than the continuity. That's my experience of Six Sigma in that process, is that it just kind of often becomes that, and it loses something every time that senior management change, because either they don't understand Six Sigma, or they believe that's something else that they've experienced in another company or was used in a previous company. It's better, so because somebody sold them that particular sales pitch, and it's not like any of them are better than any of the others, and I'll come back to that in a couple of moments. Kaizen is another one, a bit like Six Sigma. Often starts with a big bang, very hard sell to employees and processes, but often fades very, very quickly for most organizations. There are some that keep it alive, and I'm absolutely in awe of those organizations. But often, a bit like Six Sigma, it starts with a bang, and then it kind of often becomes a bit of a fad for whatever the leadership team is for that business. And if a significant number of those people change, it often changes with them in that way. For me, that causes a problem since 2016. So since I went freelance, it becomes a huge, huge problem, because I've got one client, for example, who has had a change of somebody who is leading their projects, and I started working with them in 2017, the end of 2017, but since 2016, since the year before to today, they've had 5 senior people employed, stay for a period of time, and then move on to other projects. They believe that they've achieved the Kaizen brand, they've branded it into that business, and they've achieved it. So no projects have been completed, but they've achieved the integration of that particular philosophy, and then they're off to new pastures. And the next person comes in and says, that's a load of rubbish. That's so old school. You need Six Sigma. And it kind of goes on in that kind of way. So for me, having that particular client who's had 5 project management leads since 2016, and this seems to be very, very common within kind of project, people that are overseeing, vision plans for companies, almost very few of them appear to stay the duration. They set it and then somebody else comes in and runs it, and often somebody else comes in at the end to complete that particular vision plan. So that's what I'm experiencing as a freelancer. And what I will say is, for me personally, I go back to the basics. So all of them have 4 core elements: plan, do, check, act. Just to help as well with this plan, do, check, act, Edwards Deming later changed the check to study. So occasionally in various books, in some books you might find it says plan, do, check, act, and in other books it says plan, do, study, act. Sometimes people think the study is purely an educational aspect, but actually what he didn't make it in that way from a lecture point of view. He called it study because actually when you're checking stuff, you're studying the detail, you're studying the measures, you're studying the figures themselves. So, and that's what he generally changed it to within his philosophy. But for me, those 4 core elements, regardless of what system you're using, tends to act as the kind of the root for all of these different philosophies. And for me, working with this particular client since 2017, it helps me, kind of as they've changed that project manager, to kind of use those 4 clear points to then expand, and I can make it fit Kaizen, or I can shrink it back down into plan, do, check, act, and I can expand it and make it fit, kind of some of the philosophies of things like Six Sigma. Each of them have got their own, kind of philosophies, but at the core, that's where you are, and you can expand from them and readjust the parameters. If you have that at the back of your mind always. This is one diagram that I've seen many times. Sometimes a lot need to present it from this, all about kind of the building blocks that you have to have: real work, you have to have commitment, you have to have customer first, you have to have thinking in process. Then you've got Kaizen, measure, visualize, flow, removal of waste, lean approach. And all of these foundations then build into your pillars to do with real improvements, lean culture, and ultimately at the top you end up with the capstone of continual improvement. So they're all the different types of resources and philosophies. Some people buy into some philosophies, other people, kind of dismiss them. They've all got their own unique approaches and selling points, without any question. But fundamentally, if it doesn't have plan, do, check, act in its basis, it's not necessarily, in my opinion, going to do very well. So I'm going to come to a point of a case study. Now, this is something that I was going to collaborate with somebody else who wasn't, unfortunately, unable to, kind of be with us this evening. And he was a bit uncomfortable to leave me his presentation because it had some company logos for his business and various things. So what I've done is I've just kind of got into some of my resources and I've used kind of a more broad example. So in this process, this is a typical dashboard that I see in quite a few types of companies. So, how many severe injuries people have had, and I've simply chosen one that has a number of years. So it's a very top level dashboard, which, if you were to click in, you'd be able to see them for, kind of each year or each month and stuff along those lines. So as you can see, it's a bit dated. but it's just an example illustration of what people are tracking in relation to reactive versus proactive risk and safety measures. So, for example, in this particular case, you can see that they're tracking things like injuries per 10,000 workers, injuries per 10,000, meter cubed, and and seeing where that kind of happens. There's all sorts of different stuff to do with the severity of the injury, in the last quarter, in the last 4 quarters, so it's giving some different aspects. How many workers have been killed? So this is in the Southern Hemisphere. I thought I'd choose something a bit international for, the International Institute of Risk Safety Managers. How they compare to other areas. So this is obviously thinking about forestry, then there's agriculture, manufacturing and construction. And there's some other, what they considered some proactive measures. So, contributing to data, registered to get information, from a standard national body, and how many competency certificates awarded and stuff like that. And then they've got this kind of area here of outcome of work safe activities. I'm just going to zoom into a couple of different ones on here. So one of them here, it's very common. I'm sure all of you as safety and risk professionals will definitely have had dashboards where you're looking at the severity of injuries. And it's a reactive measure, so we can't get away from that. So and it's quite right to to measure some reactive measures. It's necessary for us to understand some of the issues and incidents that are happening in a workplace. So reactive measures are absolutely necessary without any question. But for me, when I've, in basically all of the teams that I've managed as a safety or risk professional, I've driven those teams mad every month, and perhaps sometimes on a more frequent basis than that, of looking at our measures, so such as injury rates or incident rates or near miss rates. And every single time I will ask my team, and even now I ask clients' health and safety teams, what can you do as a proactive measure to help reduce this reactive number? And I'll just tell you this story that happened to me literally a week or so ago. I was with a client with a very seasoned safety professional, over 30 years of experience, NEBOSH diploma, degree educated, and when I asked that question, so you've got these reactive measures, you've had, you've got an accident rate of A, B, or C, you've got an incident rate of this, what proactive measures can you come up with to help drive, potentially that number down? And he gave me the blankest expression I've seen for a long time at that question. So, the most blank expression I've seen for a long, long time. And he ended up just throwing the pen on the floor, on the table. And he eventually said to me, well, unless we're going to actually start repeating training that people have had, and, there isn't anything, so, and it was really interesting to see his exacerbation at that process. And I said, well, that does sound like a proactive measure, so, one, you can have a schedule of retraining people, but there's also other ways of retraining people, or increasing people's education, or bringing it to the forefront of people's mind on a more regular basis. And you can measure that in a proactive way. That might be by training people, as he said. And I said, it could be that, we're, that kind of training doesn't necessarily have to be formal training in a classroom. It could be by introducing peer review. So, so how many times are you going to do a peer review? Perhaps you've got a whole load of engineers working on a plant, on a chemical manufacturing, and they don't necessarily have to do it every time. You could do it every time. So, but peer review. So, everybody's given so many peer reviews to do across their things, across their area of work, across their plant that they operate. It could be something as simple as that. It could be toolbox talks. So it could be, kind of team briefing activities. So, there's all sorts of different ways that proactive measures can actually be delivered and then also measured. So you set targets for those proactive aspects, and then you're able to do them. I'm going to come back to that process in the next slide. So, but it is important for me as a safety professional, as a risk management professional as well, when I see a reactive measure and it's a core reactive measure for that organization, or for that, or for legal reasons sometimes, to ask that question, okay, that's a reactive measure. What does the proactive measure that could help reduce that number look like? And, when I ask that, I am absolutely shocked over my time since 2016 as a freelance. I am absolutely stunned sometimes and shocked at safety and risk professionals who just look at me with an absolute blank expression, time and time again. It really does, kind of surprise me, because these were fundamental systems when I joined ICI that perhaps, I just then took for granted in, oil and gas when I moved into oil and gas. When I came out of oil and gas and I worked as a national director for a light engineering company, they were just taken for granted, and and they were deliverables. So let's have a look at this particular chart from that same chart, and this goes really well for me. And this is almost an example. I had a trainee that worked for me a number of years back who, while studying for his NEBOSH diploma, was really struggling with how something became a proactive measure versus a reactive measure. And I almost use this exact example in this way. So here we have, the number of improvement and infringements and prohibition notices issued, within the course of this business or this sector, versus how many visits had been completed over the same period of time. So, as a just in case, hopefully I'm just teaching you to suck eggs in this particular example. But what I said to this individual, this trainee of mine, was, when the reactive measure is how many of these notices and infringements and prohibitions that the safety professionals are putting in place. That's the reactive measure. There's a clear reactive measure in this aspect. However, over the top of that, there is a proactive measure of how many visits are actually taking place. So it becomes a proactive measure because it's something you're able to do to influence or potentially influence the other figure. And I like this particular illustration because it nice and clearly shows that actually as the visits have increased and then been maintained, it's the number of improvements and infringements have actually decreased, and generally outside of a few, perhaps blips, it's still continuing to decrease over that particular period of time. So for me, that's how they go together. That's why I'm always asking the question myself of, okay, so we've got this reactive measure. What can we do as a proactive measure to influence or potentially influence that number going forward? So let's just move on ever so slightly to one of our next to my next point, really. And that is, sorry, let me just go back. No, yep. I'm going forward. So the next one is about this word, proactive. So it needs to be something that's proactive for it to be a proactive measure. And just to use a little bit of kind of visual acuity, you need to measure something that depends on you entirely for it to be a proactive measure. So it's something that you or your organization is doing. It entirely depends upon you to be a proactive measure. It's something that you are putting in place, that you are going to do either as an individual or as individuals or as an organization. That's what makes it proactive rather than reactive. There's something that often slightly when I work with Americans, they often use retroactive as a reactive kind of aspect. I quite like that aspect of just emphasizing that it's retro, i.e. past active in that way. So when we're looking at reactive data or retro kind of active data, it's the past point. So I just like it because it kind of resonates with me personally. So when it comes to this word proactive, for me, there's a couple of things that three core things that I apply to my proactive measures. So as a core function, first of all, it's about defining a clear safety or risk goal. So what is it that I want to see? And sometimes it requires me to go and sell that to a leadership team. And then to map it out. And this is the thing that I often find really strange when I go into businesses, that they create these vision plans. And I say, okay, so you've got a 2025 vision plan. So what's this year's plan? And they say, well, we've just got this 2025 vision. But what they often don't really break down in detail really is kind of what are the key stage gates for each of the years in sequence. So for me, having a clear goal is absolutely essential. Mapping it out year on year, perhaps quarter by quarter in the immediacy. So I've got a 2025 vision plan. This is what I expect to achieve by the time that we're going into 2024. This is what we'd hopefully be have achieved by 2023. This is what hopefully we'll have achieved in 2020 by the end of 2022. So now I'm thinking, right, okay, so what's the next 6 months look like, and what does the first 2 quarters of 2021 look like? So actually mapping it out. And the other thing that I often find really kind of strange for me personally is how people often won't revise their plan. And for me, all of these plans are revisable and changeable and adaptable. So for me personally, always being prepared to change your plan to, improve the plan, or, you might have just been so grandiose in, kind of the thought process that, actually it's an unachievable aim. That's been set, the goal is just unachievable, perhaps because a business has been purchased, perhaps because a business has had to downsize because of a global pandemic. There has to be that facility to revise plans, to scale them up, or to perhaps even scale them down. And people should not be scared of doing so. It should be part of the plan. And then again, some regular measures that I see on dashboards or as items within the broader information would be things like training completed. So often a lot of my clients and lots of companies that I've worked at will have a training matrices, and they will look at a level of compliance against that training matrices. Things like site walk rounds completed, a great proactive measure. Safety inspections completed, but actually how many items are found from safety inspections might then turn into a proactive, a reactive measure. Again, toolbox talks completed, another one that I see, kind of often as a proactive measure. But sometimes we just have to be creative in the proactive measures. So sometimes, our reactive measure, we have to be creative in creating an effective proactive measure to help counter or have the potential to counter that reactive measure. So obviously it's a very whistle-stop, kind of tour. Hopefully for seasoned professionals, you're kind of, it's been a, kind of something that just kind of resonates with where you are. For other people, it might hopefully have given some food for thought and processes around, getting proactive with these things. But hopefully it's giving you a bit more of an understanding about kind of reactive versus proactive measures, and the evolution of proactive measures. So thinking about all the way back to Edwards Deming and further afield, and the aspect of that, continual improvement programs are often bespoke, and companies, need to think about it in those terms of how's it going to look in their organization. How's it going to look, in 2025? What do they want it to look like? How's it going to fit with their core values that they have today? And perhaps, the evolution of those core values, in a couple of years to come. And that kind of finishes me off really, from where I was, it's kind of really over to kind of questions really. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Stop showing screen. I don't know if that has stopped showing my screen.
Yes, it has, Lee. Yeah,
okay.
It has.
Thank you very much for that reassurance. So yes, I don't know if anybody has kind of decided to kind of ask any questions or raise any supporting comments or anything like that.
Yeah, so we've got one question from John Thomas. Do you have any links for Six Sigma learning? Sorry.
I probably do. But a quick Google search. I mean, there's a lot of organisations that do Six Sigma. I'm just trying to think of the organisation that I was originally trained with, but it eludes me. But I probably do have, but not off the top of my head, unfortunately. So I might be able to get some stuff to Donna, and she can pop it out. Would that be good, Donna, to do?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. We can send it directly, no problem.
I'll try and find the company that I trained with. It was absolutely excellent, but obviously it was quite a long time ago. So, but there are a great number of people. If you do Google it, John, for providers, I would definitely speak to several providers and ask them about, about their experience of helping support people through the Six Sigma process. Because you can do the training all you like, but really ask them about how do they support people after the fact, because that's where you get the sign off, especially for the kind of the black belt kind of stuff. You have to have a mentor, and you have to get signed off officially to enter into that particular area of the Six Sigma black belt official statuses and stuff like that. So but definitely something, ask a couple of them, and definitely even the one that I provide for you, contact them, ask them about what that support looks like, because it isn't something that you can just do with Six Sigma. You can't, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I bought a Six Sigma book and we operate Six Sigma. They really don't. There's a lot of stuff to Six Sigma in that sense. So hopefully that helps, John.
Brilliant, thank you, Lee. We don't have any other questions as yet. If anybody's got any further questions, please just pop them in the questions section. I don't know if you want to wait a couple of minutes, and then we can see if any more come in.
I don't mind waiting, see if anybody's got any questions or observations. I mean, it'd be really interesting to find out how useful kind of the the kind of overview was. So as if it has been kind of a nice bit of a refresher about thinking about kind of the core components or and stuff like that, then obviously that feedback would be appreciated, or perhaps even if it hasn't been, it kind of helps us think about the future of these programs, kind of going forwards.
Yeah, no, that's great, Lee. No, doesn't seem to be any other questions coming in. Yeah, no further questions, Lee.
Okay, so well, thank you very much for joining us today as part of the Northwest, kind of region of the IRSM. It's much appreciated, you attending these things and engaging. So thank you very much for that. We are hoping to have something set for the 22nd of September as our next webinar. Again, 6:30 to 7:30, and hopefully it'll be a different voice presenting some information to you on that evening. So, but don't forget to comment on our LinkedIn page. Telling people what value you got out of this evening, and really encouraging people to get involved and join the IRSM, as well as kind of come along for these Northwest regional meetings. So thank you very, very much for that. And if there's nothing else, then I think that's an early finish, not by much, but an early finish for us, Donna.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending, and hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you, Lee.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.